Welcome everyone, this is Denny and Karl with Get Wisdom. Thanks for joining us today. Karl is going to channel Sabbatai Zevi. So Sabbatai Zevi will be an addition to the channeling series, which Karl and I have been doing for some time now. And we have 7 questions for Sabbatai Zevi. He was a Jewish scholar from the 1600s. The inspiration for a lot of the questions and research that was done was from a book by Robert Sefer, 1666, Redemption Through Sin. Also some other resources to come up with the questions and find out about this guy. At one point he had 1 million followers, and it was like a breakaway group of the Jewish faith. So that's what we're here to find out about, what this guy can tell us now that he's a light being, about this perhaps pivotal episode in the history of Europe and the Middle East. It includes Turkey and modern day Israel, and some very interesting claims coming out of this research. Probably like what we've seen before, some truth, some things that aren't true. But we will let Sabbetai himself explain the ins and outs of this as much as he can. So with that, thanks everybody for joining us. Thank you, Karl. Karl and I will have a little discussion about this. You will have seen a bio before you see Karl and I, so you get a little bit of frame of reference about who we're talking about here, and then we'll start the channeling. Thanks, Karl.
All right, thank you, Denny, for that intro, and thanks to all of you who are watching. I'm particularly intrigued by spiritual and religious figures who are in a position of some kind of leadership because it turns out that faith is rather important. We take it so for granted, even those who are raised in a faith of one sort or another, and maybe have come to feel maybe it's not such an important thing as they were told when they were little, because maybe they've drifted away from religious practice and gotten away with it. It doesn't seem like there's a hole in their lives and the world's just going on as before and so on. But they're really underappreciating their potential to contribute something more if they're in alignment with the divine. So to me, it's a subject of great interest to see these kinds of people and learn about what they were doing and why. And as much when they might have become corrupted in some way, misguided in some way, to deviate from divine truth. That is rather easy to have happen, even when you're a highly spiritual individual. And there's powerful reasons why that's so. You're a danger to the established order. If you are spiritual and you get a following, particularly, we're not supposed to do that. We're supposed to be just little peons and mind our own business and not be really interested in much beyond our own well-being. Be complacent.
Right.
And just let things happen.
And early in his life, he was a Sephardic ordained rabbi from Smyrna, which is now Izmir, Turkey. And he was interested in the Kabbalah, and he was convinced by others that he was a Messiah and that he was going to have a follower. The stories are that he was very reluctant at first. So you get this idea that maybe he could tell, this might not go in a good direction. So he was reluctant to step forward and say, "Oh yeah, I'm the Messiah." But eventually he was convinced of that by others. In fact, there's a fellow that's named in that whole story. You can look it up. But yeah, I mean, there's the inception of all this seemed a little bit more innocent, a little bit more maybe divinely aligned, and then things I get the impression that things went crazy after that in his life, in a big way.
Uh-huh. Well, it's an invitation to trouble to entertain such an idea. For one thing, that's a very well-established diagnostic criterion for delusional thinking. So immediately you're a psychiatric case to the mainstream, making such a claim.
Yeah.
But it actually fits many times, because the average person who claims such a thing often turns out to have many kinds of delusional thoughts and aberrant behavior and notions about the world and their place in the world, and on and on and on. I mean, it's one thing to say you were someone famous way in the distant past and you're back again, because we all come back again and again and again. So we've been other things in other lives.
Yeah, and we come back to be light workers of all things. Messianic figures, in a sense.
Well, we're all on that path.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's such a loaded thing to claim to be Jesus in particular. And so there's a lot of accentuation of the importance of Jesus. And it's not without good reason. But there are people who have gone overboard with it. And I see that as a little bit of a misguided notion and a manipulation, perhaps, also.
Yeah.
Sort of like the Kabbalah looks at these sort of things and says, all right, you want to follow Jesus? Take him and choke on him. And then they shove Jesus at you and rub it in your face. And we've been given this perspective, and I don't mean to step on anyone's toes here, but even the fact you have the cross as the big symbol for Christianity everywhere.
Yeah.
It's the logo of torture and death by the interlopers that's on display.
Right.
And of course, that's seen as having, the ultimate great meaning for Christ's life, that he gave his life for us and so on. But my goodness, what a dreadful and grisly imagery to embrace for an ambassador of love,
Right.
So there's a lot of really difficult entanglements with non-truth as well as truth in all of this.
And you, like we were discussing earlier before we started recording, that it's hard to touch a subject like this without insulting someone or someone giving, there's some aspect of this where someone's going to take exception, be offended by it, whether it's anti-Semitic claims or the question not being phrased to give due consideration to some aspect of the whole story. There's a whole laundry list of things where we could, violate, someone's sensibilities around something like this. But it literally cannot be avoided if you're really going to investigate something and get to the truth. It's really hard to avoid stepping on toes or hurting someone's feelings. It's extremely difficult to do that. And we're awash in mind control and being manipulated. And the first order of business is to create some kind of division, of human against human, and that's exactly what the interlopers want. And probably much of what happened in Sabbatai Zevi's life was designed for that purpose. Where he was interfered with, that was the goal, most likely.
Well, we'll find out, I assume, along the way here, what he was all about and what he did and why. And I think it'll be quite interesting. Many of these figures have been manipulated and their story manipulated subsequently also.
Right. Yeah.
And that was true of Jesus as well. And there's a lot that's been censored from the scriptures about him and his life and others who were disciples and so on. And the whole story of what he was teaching has been edited. So we only have little windows and partial truths to work with. And people become so doctrinaire and so entrenched with their particular set of beliefs, their particular sectarian doctrine, if you will. And you almost can't talk to them because they'll take offense if you disagree with anything they say. And their certitude about it is rather amazing, given the paucity of actual historical knowledge and evidence that it's stemming from.
Right.
We just have kind of fragments and secondhand accounts, centuries later, for the most part.
Yeah.
About some of these figures. And I know no matter who I look into, whether it's the Buddha or any of these great avatars, and ask about their lives, I'm told the same thing, that their acolytes, their followers, began to be corrupted, and the message and the teaching themselves became corrupted over time.
Right.
And then, what the Buddha said is not really what the Buddha said, and so on, because you're getting a filtered version of it. So it's a mess. It just is.
Yeah. And then just added to that, there's the whole issue of the restraints that the divine realm is placed under in dealing with humans. We're in the dark. We have to ask the right questions. Sometimes we can ask a good question and we can't be given the answer because if they did, it would endanger us in some way, or, and I guess that's probably the best way to explain it. So there's restraints, constraints on both sides of this equation of the channeling work, finding out what the light beings can tell us. They can't lead. They're not going to throw. That's the other thing I wanted to say. They're not going to throw somebody into the bus either. They're not going to castigate, disparage, or accuse someone of something. Even if they did it, it's not their place to do that kind of thing. I think part of that has to do with just our own mentality through the corruption and what our notions of injustices are all about, which they don't support. We can go back to the edict, to what we've learned is that, every perpetrator started out as a victim. So the idea, the whole program behind Get Wisdom is everything. It's the healing that needs to be done for the perpetrators and the victims. Perhaps even starting with the perpetrators, because that's the quickest way to solve the overall problem facing humanity right now. So that's the focus that the divine realm maintains in dealing with us, dealing with Karl as a channeler. If I could be so bold in trying to explain that, because we're not going to be given the whole story the way I ask for it in these questions. A lot of times, the very pointed, direct answer that could be given to some of these questions is avoided for those kinds of reasons.
Yeah, there is a lot of circumspection and caution to not overstep boundaries. It's rather maddening for those of us who really want to get to the deep truths and have the information in a total sense and complete package.
Right.
But the world can't work that way, unfortunately. And the biggest constraint, as you mentioned, is the divine cannot prove itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you think, well, that's nuts, but I still every day am amazed that rule is there and that it's enforced.
Yeah.
But that's how scrupulous the divine is. When it sets about doing something and creates rules of engagement, it will not overstep those boundaries. And there are good reasons for it. They may not be things that we want to see happen, and we may not like them.
Right.
But it's true to the idea of putting us in charge.
Right.
And this is kind of what everybody wants. People don't want to be somebody's puppet.
Right.
They don't want to be a...
It's like the best way to make the idea of free will an actual meaningful statement, a meaningful concept.
Yeah. You're either free or you're not.
Right.
Because if you're free some of the time and other times they're going to reel you in and make you do something else, you're not free. You're just, it's a game. It's a pretend circumstance that you're a part of then. And so that total freedom gives us the entire burden. Now, we can reach out to the Almighty for support and guidance, inspiration, and healing, as well as protection at times. But it along with that means it's going to be done in a very measured way and in a very personal way.
Right.
They're not going to create a miracle about you and then so you can put that on display and, prove the divine is real. Because here I was, this wretched person with all these problems, and all of a sudden overnight, whammo, I'm perfect and I'm healthy and
here's my cape.
Yeah. and so would that were so. That's what we all kind of want, Give us a break here. Come on.
Yeah.
Clean this place up once and for all. But that's the point of the challenge, to see what we can do. And God is counting on us to make this happen, which seems the craziest idea of all to me. Because we're so limited.
I agree.
Yeah, but it is what it is. So these are the terms and the rules in play.
Okay, let's see what Sabbatai has to say.
All right, so I'm looking forward to this one. This isn't my favorite of subjects because of the history and what I suspect might be some major harm caused along the way. But this would not be the first time that's happened, because most of us do as much in a negative sense as a positive sense with their lives. It might be just local. We give our siblings the business, and, we give hard time to our parents, and, maybe we don't like our teachers and make them feel bad because we're snots, and, but doing it on a world stage is another matter.
Right.
So we'll see. All right. I will connect to his consciousness in the light. And I do that through Creator of all that is. It's how I do my channeling, to ensure accuracy and to put safety around the work. So I will be talking to that being and not an imposter. Channelers who don't use such a precaution will get an outreach from imposters. And this is typically what happens. And they're not channeling who they think they are. They're not talking to an archangel. They're not talking to a great figure from history, or even an exalted being in the light of some kind, giving them a name to use or whatever. They're typically talking to an extraterrestrial psychic. That's the commonest source of disinformation. And they know all about our spirituality. They can quote a chapter and verse, and they can reinvent it and rewrite it to make it new and fresh. And they do this all the time. But what you get is basically some hand holding, just some general bucking up and encouragement and so on, which sounds good. And it's what people want. They don't want to be embroiled in problems, and they don't want to get enmeshed with that very directly. So if they get some reassurance, everything is going to work out, everything's going to be fine. They breathe a sigh of relief and they think, wow, this is great. We're going to ascend. The world's going to be wonderful. And it's all a lie, because the interlopers have other plans for us and they're dark. So I will do my best to make this connection. It's all I can do. And we'll see what this individual is able to share with us, given the rules of engagement. And so I will get in the state of consciousness I need, and he will announce when he is on board.
Okay, thank you.
This is Sabbatai Zevi speaking.
Thank you for joining us. Were you able to pass successfully to the light? And what was your assessment of your life's work compared to your assessment of it as a light being?
I was not able to pass immediately, but I was rescued through the beneficence of some of my followers, ironically, who I was misguiding, who were praying for me. And among those followers were enough who were still connected to the divine, enough to be heard and to be assisted with their entreaties. So I was blessed to be the recipient of their largesse, their loving kindness. Figures like myself who gain prominence in the world as a leader spiritually, no matter what the affiliation and its foundation might be, are considered a danger to the interlopers because they pull people together and unify them behind ideas. This, the interlopers know, can cause trouble. They believe it is all due to human consciousness, and that simple alignment of energies willfully put in place by those people thinking and wanting the same things to happen and have a certain power in their consciousness. This is because the extraterrestrials do have some psychic ability and indeed can manipulate energy with their thoughts. And they equate that with what humans might be doing. This is why their strategy is always divide and conquer. They want to divide every group into warring factions, to distract them and to get them attacking one another. All are lowered and rendered less effective in the doing. This serves the darkness beautifully, and is a time-honored strategy you will see enacted over and over and over again in the very world you inhabit today. It is not enough to simply be an average person and perhaps even considered a victim as a member of a minority. You must hate your oppressor and do so categorically. And it might be an entire race of people or an entire religious group who hold a different perspective, potentially, but you will never know on an individual basis who might well be a good friend and kindred soul, but you are tarring them with a broad brush. This strategy is deadly and is repurposed and revisited again and again and again, and has been all through history. This is what gets movements going, fuels them for a time, because they are put to a good purpose as a magnet. So people will self-identify. They are seekers of something deeper. They have inner spiritual yearnings, which is forbidden. Those above the fray who are not being manipulated effectively are actively seeking. So to make that visible by reaching out to a would-be teacher marks them as a member of a rogue community of humans needing further suppression. If they can influence that religious leader to corrupt the thinking of their followers, they have a perfect disinformation campaign of propaganda done by humans themselves to one another. And their fingerprints are not left behind to allow tracing the true origin of this corruption. This is what my legacy was leading towards in the course of my life. I did become corrupted along the way. The idea I was the Messiah returning was a false perception. And it was a disinformation campaign instilled within my deep subconscious mind and the conscious level of my mind ultimately as well. What they did in effect was to set me up as a beacon to attract others, wanting salvation, wanting a rescuer. Only those who are troubled, who are dissatisfied, and see flaws in the world and the empty rhetoric of their leadership, who come forth in search of something more, something deeper, something more meaningful. The interlopers see your lives as worthless to begin with, and your yearnings for having a higher purpose and a loftier role in mind as being misguided and a kind of hubris that is solely stemming from ego alone. This they know much about because they are ego-driven themselves. And always this is the assumption that all are self-promoting and wanting to pick your pocket or your brain, pick it clean of ideas, and leave you with misguided notions, frustration, and feelings of personal inadequacy and failure if they can arrange that to happen. The idea of setting someone up as a false prophet pays many dividends for them. They can see all who come forward as followers as needing to have a place in their inner being filled by a grander vision. They want to avoid such people from gaining any position of power or authority, because if they find an answer, they might reach out and begin to convince others they have something of value and gain a following, and then become a force to reckon with. So the game they play is to identify the would-be leaders and then corrupt them. And once they've taken charge of the leader, use and exploit that figure to attract and draw in as many other seekers as possible for them to be further manipulated and constrained. And that is the price paid by my adherents, those enamored of my teachings, who followed in my footsteps and wanted to use my ideas. They corrupted them all along the way, visiting them again and again and again with mind control and corrupting them with spirit attachments to further undermine them and weaken them. This is done today in the world across the board. They target everyone in the clergy, everyone who is a new age guru or would-be guru, a spiritual advisor, a spiritual coach or counselor, just like they do among physicians, professors, leaders in industry, scientific researchers, the industrious among you. They will find those who are being effective in their lives and corrupt them in a way to derail what they are working on, if possible, obstruct it, insert faulty thinking and bad advice that will steer them in the wrong direction and hopefully end up with them lost in a cul-de-sac that leads nowhere. And their energies will be dissipated in a harmless direction because it will not add to progress and is wasted effort. This is what the interlopers wished to see. And they worked on me relentlessly to shape my thinking in a way that had me flirt with the darkness on the one hand, but attract the seekers of light on the other. This is their cleverness in action, the level of cunning they use to defuse the humanitarian impulses deflect them or distract the individuals with such desires in a way they must suspend their humanitarian efforts because they suddenly find themselves in trouble in some respect and get sidelined. Or if possible, they will corrupt the thinking of the would-be do-gooder. So along with the uplifting platitudes and encouragement, there will be a false message at times that creeps in alongside. Once this is embraced, it will get into the warp and woof of people deep within their inner beliefs. And this will start the undermining that will worsen over time until people are willing to surrender what they once believed was not only true, but sacred and an ultimate answer for life's challenges. They will end up surrendering it all and come away feeling smug because they are told within their mind they are finally growing up and seeing the truth of things and no longer fooling themselves that there might be a divine force they can call on. This is evil at its worst. And you are enmeshed in evil. It is all around you. It encapsulates the world and is choking off the very life force keeping everything going. It is anti-life in its aims because it is grooming you for elimination. And everything you cherish about your life on the earth. They care marginally more about your planet, but only to the extent it gives them a stepping stone to elsewhere in the galaxy. And it is a memento of successful conquest and a source of inner ego gratification. They have subjugated your world and your lives for thousands and thousands of years. They have many, many fond memories of all the human folly, all of which was engineered by them to come about, and laughed at you even as you went down in flames, suffering and in pain, relishing the reality it was they and their power that caused you to fail. That is the story of my life and its involvement as an in-between in the fight and ongoing contest between good and evil.
Okay, thank you. Can you explain the success of Sabbateanism with over 1 million followers in the late 1600s and its relationship and justification by the Lurianic Kabbalah?
Sadly, this is all a consequence of inner corruption. If you think about the likelihood and logic of a splinter group with strange notions departing from what was heretofore considered blessings from the divine to champion the good in things, the good in nature, the good in people themselves, to promote an excuse for evil is truly diabolical. It is certainly non-divine. To embrace that as a kind of progress, as a kind of liberated thinking, and a useful pursuit to realign one's thinking and make allowances for a new kind of moral construct and delineation of acceptability based on personal considerations of a selfish nature, simply because one can make a philosophical pronouncement and assign it meaning and a name and give it an important place in the pantheon and support by way of personal involvement a certain intensity and prioritization of words and deeds. And in many cases, provide working examples that assignment of roles not only works, but can be personally rewarding and helpful, is simply an illustration of how easily depravity can be defended and even embraced as a lifestyle. This can only happen when there is corruption afoot, because human beings are inherently too smart for that. You have an inner compass, an inner guidance in the form of an oversight function through the higher self, acting as a go-between for you as an extension of the soul in the physical and the soul itself, your origin and interconnection totally with the human family as a part of the Almighty directly. You are literally part of the living God, but do not know this. The interlopers know you can exhibit untold powers of a mysterious sort, and they have grudging respect for that, but do not understand its origins. They are of a lower order because they're disconnected from the divine. By embracing the darker aspects of a kind of rationale for the existence of evil as being a kind of useful energy at times and an inevitable consequence of God's creation, This is a massive rationalization that was aided and abetted through mind control manipulation to occur to me in the first place, and also to others, promoting certain perspectives promulgated through the Kabbalah, that the divine was the architect of evil as well as goodness. This at once creates a different kind of yardstick and an elevation of dark thoughts, dark ways of being, as perhaps having a useful purpose and a certain degree of acceptability. This is a slippery slope indeed, and mirrors quite closely the fall from grace undertaken by Lucifer and the angelic cohort who followed him in turning away from the divine and leaving the lofty higher astral plane permanently, but for the possibility of redemption. We have not closed the door even on that ultimate source of evil. That is not the same thing as promoting it, supporting it, aiding and abetting it, or justifying what it does. It is a potential consequence of the inevitability inherent with freedom of choice. Within the array of possibilities, everything has an opposite. This does not mean it has to exist in actuality and may only be a potential. And in the case of negativity, it is not compelled to burst forth and be exercised and implemented by anyone. Such an action is a choice that can be made by conscious beings to indulge themselves with what might seem as a near-term gain in some way. It serves the self, to be sure, in an immediate sense, to take something that is not yours. If that is not fair to the other party, not agreed to, and causes harm through the loss to them, it is a karmic transgression, even though you are rewarded. And the law of karma will seek restitution for that. The embracing of an array of negative possibilities that go against prior ideas of morality and even justice was misguided thinking of mine. And to have that embraced through a collaboration with Islam was a further debasement underway and was intentional. if there is poison available to harm humans who are poorly controlled, you can be sure it will be employed again and again by the interlopers and will not be respecting boundaries, geopolitical leanings, religious heritage, cultural differences, and so on. The interlopers are opportunistic. They love getting a nice, juicy, evil idea that causes harm and finding a new way to deploy it. Much like a cruise missile that will find its target, they relish their arsenal of such weaponry through word and deed, foisted on people through manipulation to constrain their thoughts, manipulate their inner feelings, and induce new behaviors directly to have people following poor guidance that will further debase them, make their lives more difficult, and make them more unpalatable to others, and create points of friction all along the way. They work both sides of an argument. So they are masterful in providing new ideologies and defenses for why they exist. And they will steadfastly encourage their acolytes to embrace the new notion and run with it. At the same time, they are gearing up the opposition who hold opposite perspectives and will find the newcomers to be a thorn in their side at a minimum, and a major threat, perhaps, and enough so to even attack them. This is how wars get started routinely, through such inner manipulations. So the differing parties see the others as being intolerable to coexist with. Where does one turn under such circumstances but to annihilation? This is a dangerous idea because it's surrendering to evil, and in the doing puts you at war with the law of karma, who will return that evil to you as the target. Beings of light know this and will not engage in such folly. The interlopers in your midst see the workings of this mechanism, but do not assign it as having a higher, loftier, highly organized and orchestrated corrective mechanism that is unfailing in delivering justice to the evildoer. This is because within your galaxy, the day of reckoning is delayed so. That is in keeping with the allowance of free will choices, even bad ones, to persist, so that you can learn for yourself what is wise and what may not be. Karma will be the ultimate teacher if you fail the test. those who took my corrupting beliefs in wrongdoing as having a rationale and a justification and extended them into the realm of thinking of Islam performed a great disservice, as I ended up doing as my life became corrupted and led many on a dark path.
Okay, thank you. Can you explain the significance of the Dönmeh, or those referred to as having turned away, in Turkey and in other countries where the Jewish faith is present?
Keep in mind that religion exists as a means of power and control. It is imposed by the hierarchy of the interlopers to think in this way. This is why there always must be leaders and followers, those in power and those who are not, those who have a say, and those who must take whatever is given to them, but have no real voice and no real ability to make things happen. This is not a fair or divine way of running things. In the physical realm, where there are physical constraints, those who can manipulate matter, have control of resources of a physical nature, can be in a position of authority, of power and control by virtue of those physical necessities they control, because others may have too great a burden to find their needs elsewhere, and so must come to you and bow to your wishes, pay the price you decree for sharing your wealth. This is an unnatural way to be. It is a product of physical existence that these imperatives exist. The light beings are self-sufficient and have available to them unlimited energy for any kind of purpose, and can literally create anything to meet their needs. So their reach is vast, and it is only those large, unique enterprises that are a challenge for them and will demand great ingenuity and creativity as well to support and further. But ordinary living is a given, unopposed, unconstrained, and self-directed with ease in the higher planes of existence. This puts the physical human at such a great disadvantage. They can be easily suppressed and caused great harm and great suffering, should one wish to do that. The splinter group, the Dönmeh, was a disinformation campaign and a diversion that was done in a sense of divide and conquer to further confuse and confound things. The interlopers would be quite happy to have 1,000 differing religions all working at once, or a million. In a sense, they create an individual ideology for each person. They treat people in the aggregate for reasons of efficiency, but no two will end up precisely alike in their beliefs because of the individual soul makeup that is involved as a kind of filter and inner resource to process all of the incoming stimuli, to make sense of things and shape the current experience through personal choice in reaction to what comes their way. The interlopers have promoted many movements, highly constrained and manipulated all along the way to stay within certain acceptable parameters, primarily to exert a measure of power and control over the membership. By hewing to a set of principles, they essentially become members of a club that will stick together, want to be physically in proximity, and will meet together regularly, all of which provides ideal circumstances for them to be shaped, cultivated, and manipulated to embrace a certain working philosophy that may have a religious perspective at its core, but functionally will keep people preoccupied with a set of rules as well as restrictions on conduct and what is deemed of value for them to spend their time and energies. This might be quite draconian and quite limiting, as with those sects that deny wealth and luxuries, modern conveniences, are quite rigorous about sharing in an absolute way. So no one can aspire to have wealth. It will take all they can do collectively to keep everyone in a healthy mode and supported, because many will be less capable and will have to live off the fruits of others. This system can work as long as people believe in it and follow the rules. This is true of every such hierarchical conception and distortion. The rule of law works as well when people believe in it and support it. If the majority agrees to the laws that they need to be obeyed and support through their taxes a law enforcement apparatus, it will indeed serve to keep things in line. Even with occasional lapses, on average, it will be a workable system with respect to law and order, if little else. all religions have come under scrutiny because they were a creation of the interlopers to begin with. They were promulgated as a way of constraining human consciousness around respective ideologies that would at once satisfy inner yearnings, but keep them hewing to a set of principles that would at the same time limit their choices and keep them manageable from the perspective of the interlopers. If people embrace socialist ideas and end up living in poverty, so at least the goal of uniformity and equity is honored, that is just fine from the perspective of the interlopers. They do not want to see individual initiative rewarded. They do not want to see excellence. They do not want to see human innovation. They do not want to see humans striving for something greater. They want to see you oppressed, and they will do it through your religion as well as your politics. If you look at the comparative beliefs of the world's major religions, you can see quite clearly the handiwork of the interlopers with regard to how many harsh rules might be present. When there are many rules, many proscriptions on accepted conduct, behavior, and lifestyle choices, and these, when there are infractions, defended with painful punishments, even death, you see the work of evil. We understand this very idea will be abhorrent to many who are devout followers of a faith. You have a choice to live as slaves or to live as free, divine human beings. My teachings and the groups that followed and inherited the legacy I started received a legacy of corrupt thinking. It is that simple. That body of knowledge was not 100% corrupt or 100% inaccurate or 100% not in divine alignment. This is what makes the choice between good and evil often a difficult one. It will not come labeled as such. It will often be promoted in a positive way and cheered on by its proponents as true wisdom, and perhaps even as having a divine origin, and viewed as in alignment and not only acceptable to God, but an aspect of God's wisdom and usual judgment in similar circumstances. We encourage you to seek truth through the application of love as a measurement tool. If divine decrees go against the working of love, they are non-divine. You are being fooled. This is not so difficult to sort through, but for one cold fact. Most religious precepts are instilled via mind control manipulation and will not be possible to override. Beliefs are beliefs. They are the inner operating instructions and how you have come to be put together. This is a time for great wisdom and an increase in discernment to be fostered, to take a long, hard look at what you believe, at least with a part of your being, and see if there are other parts of you that might be in disagreement or suspicious about the wisdom and the true nature of those beliefs with respect to divine alignment or non-alignment. Through force of will, it is possible to set aside faulty beliefs to some extent. It is a fight worth waging if you can see the signs and see the handiwork from the interlopers within your own being. If you ask for divine assistance to change these beliefs, to raise you up to a higher perspective, you will have a fighting chance to regain your power and become free. Most will not choose that path because their mind will not accept there is anything wrong. You are looking through the lens of history at many who made poor choices because there was a corrupt influence ready and eagerly awaiting an opportunity to instill faulty beliefs within a whole generation of would-be spiritual human beings, simply looking for answers, simply wanting to find their way in a difficult world. And were open-minded, but not appreciating that it put them in danger to be noticed and then constrained in a worse way. This is a high price to pay for being a seeker of truth, to be saddled with even bigger lies and falsehoods, such that you yourself embrace the folly and perhaps even participate directly in the harming of yourself and others as well by embracing and living the lies through your thoughts, feelings, words, and deeds.
Okay, thank you. It is claimed by some sources that Jacob Frank, your alleged successor, was able to influence what is now known as the Illuminati by way of Adam Weishaupt, who was your financing source. Can you explain the Illuminati's actual genesis and relationship to the dark alien agenda?